Two arrogant officers believed they were conducting a standard arrest when they detained her. But behind the composed gaze of the woman in handcuffs was a DEA agent who had been tracking them for several months. The stretch of Highway 82 just beyond Thomasville, Alabama, was long and deserted, lined only with pine trees on both sides and the occasional rusty mailbox leaning toward the roadside. It was shortly after 8 in the evening, and the sky carried a heavy orange tint that made the surroundings appear hazy. Tina Ellis, age 38, was heading back home to Jackson, Mississippi, after attending a medical conference in Montgomery over the weekend. Her playlist played soft jazz, her phone was set to Do Not Disturb, and she had driven this road many times before. She was neither speeding nor weaving. Her windows were up, her car was spotless, and her seatbelt securely fastened. So when flashing blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror, her initial reaction was not fear, just mild irritation. She slowed down, turned on her signal, and pulled onto the dirt shoulder. She lowered the window, placed both hands on the wheel, and waited. A tall officer walked up to the car with one hand resting on his holstered weapon. He did not greet her. "License and registration," he demanded without making eye contact, his tone flat. Tina handed the documents over silently. He barely glanced at them before nodding toward the back seat. "You traveling alone?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "Where are you coming from?" "Medical conference in Montgomery." "What's in the trunk?" "Luggage, work-related items." He tapped the roof of her car twice and ordered, "Pop it." Tina's brow furrowed briefly at the command. "Is there any reason you have a problem?" she replied calmly. Reaching for the trunk release, he walked back, and moments later another officer arrived, stockier in build, with a goatee and mirrored sunglasses even though it was evening. They spent a few minutes searching. Tina kept her gaze fixed on the side mirror. Something felt off. Not the stop itself, but the atmosphere, the silence between them, and the way the second officer kept glancing at her as if making sure she was paying attention. Then the first officer came back and said, "Step out of the vehicle, please." Tina complied, her voice steady. "Can you explain what is happening?" she asked. "We found a controlled substance in your bag. Cocaine," the second officer stated. She blinked in disbelief. "No, you did not," said Officer Sharp, whose badge was barely visible under his vest, stepping closer behind her. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "I do not consent to this search," she said louder now. "But I am not resisting." The handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists. "You are making a mistake. I have no record. I work in pharmaceuticals. You can call and verify." "We will discuss that at the station," Officer Collins interrupted as he began escorting her toward the squad car. "You can explain everything to the judge." Without another word, they pushed her into the back seat. Her breaths grew shallow, but she remained still, her mind racing through every option. Her real identification was hidden inside the lining of her suitcase, and her encrypted burner phone was stored in the glove compartment. However, she had not used either since Thursday. She gazed silently through the bars of the patrol car, remaining completely still and without blinking. Officer Collins made a joke to Officer Sharp about yet another one trying to act innocent, and they both laughed. What they did not realize was who they were dealing with. Tina Ellis was not just another woman caught on the road. She was carefully observing men just like them. The booking area carried the sharp scent of bleach mixed with the lingering aroma of fried food. Tina sat quietly on a bench firmly attached to the wall, her wrists still restrained by handcuffs and her blazer crumpled. Her face showed no emotion as she gave only her name and date of birth, refusing to provide any further information. Every reply was brief but respectful, while she mentally noted every detail of her surroundings. The deputies took their time processing her. One wondered aloud about the origins of the name Ellis. Another inquired if she had any tattoos, but she declined to answer either question. Without a word, they took her mugshot. They pressed her fingers heavily for prints and handed her clothing over to a female officer for the mandatory strip search. In the cold, tiled chamber, Tina lifted her arms as the officer carefully inspected her for hidden items. This was far from the first time she had experienced this. Yet what still stung deeply was how routine it seemed to those carrying it out, as though respect and dignity no longer mattered. "Squat," the woman said flatly. Tina did not flinch or alter a single muscle on her face. Her expression shifted only when they handed her the jail uniform, a faded orange two-piece that hung loosely around her waist. She slipped it on carefully before settling back into the waiting area alongside 6 other women. Among them was a girl who seemed no older than 20, frequently casting curious looks her way. The girl finally spoke, and Tina gave a brief nod, signaling she was just passing through. The girl grinned and said, "Aren't we all?" Time felt distorted inside the room as Tina tracked the moments by the flickering overhead light, the rhythmic chomping of gum from the bored receptionist, and the mechanical creaks from vending machines. That never seemed to work. Despite all this, her mind kept racing. Her handler, Roy Talbot, did not expect to hear from her until Monday morning. Tina was supposed to return with information from the conference, which was in fact a cover for a meeting with a mid-level informant about law enforcement infiltration in smaller southern counties. She had not mentioned to Roy that she had taken Highway 82, thinking it unnecessary, a decision she now regretted deeply. Her eyes scanned the corner of the cell, finding a camera hidden beneath a black dome. Partly obscured, but definitely a valuable clue. She committed every angle of the room to memory, along with every name tag and piece of paper that passed within her sight. Around midnight, a deputy came to escort her to a private interview they referred to as an initial appearance. However, there was no judge, only a desk, a metal chair, and a man who introduced himself as her court-appointed defense attorney. He said, "My name's Ben Ridley, but you can just call me Ben. Listen, I won't sugarcoat it. These allegations are serious. Possession with intent to distribute carries significant consequences in this county, especially since he trailed off looking at her, clearly unsure how much to reveal." Given what she asked calmly, he shrugged and said, "You are not exactly from around here. The judge tomorrow is very old-fashioned and will not appreciate being disturbed early just for you. I will do my best, but everything depends on what they claim you had. They say they found cocaine." Tina replied, "Yes, it was bagged and labeled. I did not have any drugs. I have never used." Ben rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "I am not accusing you of anything. But if it was in your suitcase, then it was yours. Then we will challenge that." Tina looked at him for a moment. His words lacked conviction, no strategy or interest. Just the tired acceptance that comes from handling too many cases ending the same way. Back in the cell, she sat down again. A guard passed and glanced inside. He whispered something to another deputy and chuckled. She did not react. They had no idea who she truly was. That made her dangerous and patient. She was not merely waiting to be released, but waiting for them to make their next slip. The next morning, the jail was noisier. Somewhere down the hall, someone shouted about a phone call. The girl from holding was gone. Breakfast arrived as cold grits with a plastic spoon. Tina did not eat. She had maybe slept an hour and a half, but her mind was alert. Around 8 in the morning, 2 guards entered. Both wore the same half-hearted, indifferent swagger that made Allison's stomach churn. One of them barked, "On your feet!" She rose, placing her hands behind her back once more, this time with less kindness than before. They escorted her down a corridor lined with barred cells into a smaller room where Officers Collins and Sharp were waiting. This was not routine. No lawyer, no documents, no courtroom official, just them. "You remember me?" Sharp inquired, folding his arms while Tina Ellis stared at him. Collins smirked and leaned against the desk, saying, "We had a bit more time to search your belongings last night, and guess what we discovered?" She stayed silent. "A second phone," he revealed, holding up her encrypted burner. "What are you going to tell us this is for? That's personal property and you don't have a warrant." He laughed. "You're not exactly in a position to throw legal terms around. You're the one caught with half an ounce of cocaine." Tina maintained a steady tone. "You planted that." Sharp's expression flickered subtly, but Collins kept his grin. "You're lucky we didn't charge you with obstruction or resisting." "I didn't resist." "You didn't even smile," Collins said with a knowing wink. Then Sharp stepped closer slowly. "You got an attitude you think you're smarter than us?" Tina tilted her head. "I know I am." Sharp seemed like he might reach for her, but Collins raised a hand, saying, "Not here." The room went silent for a moment. "Let me guess," she said deliberately, glancing between them. "You two work overtime, always the last to sign off a shift, see just enough drugs worth reporting. Save the rest for favors, resell, or to keep you quiet. You stop drivers you don't recognize, searching for the next hidden stash." Neither officer said a word. "You weren't expecting someone like me, were you?" Collins asked with a mocking tone, while Tina leaned in just a bit. "Someone who understands the chain of custody. Someone aware that your precinct already has 3 internal affairs warnings. Someone whose real identity and true occupation could bury you both under mountains of paperwork and federal charges." The tension in the room grew palpable. Collins lost his smirk. "You have a big mouth," Sharp muttered. Tina met his gaze firmly. "You carry a badge you don't merit." Collins stepped forward cautiously. "Be careful," he warned. "Do you want us to add threats to your list? You've already lied once, so why stop now?" He stared at her, and then silently turned toward Sharp, handing over his phone. "Put this in the evidence box for now," he said. "She's heading to court in 1 hour." As they escorted her back to the holding cell, Tina caught sight of another officer passing by. His name tag read, "Reyes Younger." He observed everything silently, but she noticed a flicker of uncertainty on his face. That was the first sign of a crack in their facade. Once back in the cell, she sat down again, ignoring the tray of lukewarm oatmeal left on the bench. Her mind raced. Collins and Sharp were not only corrupt but careless and arrogant. They believed they were untouchable, but now she had faces, patterns, and behaviors to work with. They had revealed themselves. The burner phone remained unused, and there was no way to unlock it without her thumbprint. There was a coded phrase only she and Roy Talbot understood that would grant her extra time. They were crafting a false story, but she had no intention of intervening just yet. The further they uncovered, the harder it would fall upon them. Half a decade earlier, Tina Ellis sat in a small cafe near Beale Street in Memphis. She sipped on weak coffee while pretending to skim through a travel magazine. She was not there for the music or the cuisine. Her eyes were fixed on a man named Derek Vaughn, a former corrections officer now believed to be a key provider for a drug network trafficking methamphetamine across West Tennessee. That day she was not Tina Ellis. She was Latrice Monroe. She was not a pharmaceutical expert, but a college dropout with 3 sealed arrest records and a boyfriend serving time at Parchman. This was the role she embodied perfectly. DEA operations seldom involved weapons or spectacular raids. Instead, they depended on silence, attentiveness, observation, and patience when others hurried. This was what made her exceptional. By the time she reached her 30th year, she had earned a reputation within the agency as a specter, someone invisible even when standing in plain view. She was neither flashy nor loud, looking every bit the woman who might fold clothes while binge-watching reality shows. This is precisely why she was invaluable. Her current mission had started just under a year ago, when a subtle but troubling sign appeared. Drug evidence was disappearing from specific rural regions. Cases with arrests made would inexplicably lose momentum. Files vanished, and confiscated property was never returned. The patterns were faint but consistent. Talbot, her handler, called her in over breakfast tacos saying he needed someone who did not resemble a federal agent. She raised an eyebrow and said, "You mean a black woman in heels?" He explained he wanted someone who intimidates others by showing no fear. She acted quickly after that, creating a cover identity as a pharmaceutical consultant with a plausible reason to travel frequently throughout southern states, sometimes opting to drive rather than fly. Nothing flashy, just someone who might appear to have access to medications enough to raise suspicion and attract attention. Tina Ellis had already established contact with 2 important informants: a former field officer in Marengo County and a pharmacy technician from Starkville who had been dismissed under unusual circumstances. Their accounts revealed a troubling pattern of small-town deputies abusing their power, sneaking into evidence lockers and making secret deals. She had not expected to get this close to the operation so fast. However, when Officer Collins and Officer Sharp stopped her, she instantly recognized Collins's name. It had appeared twice in confidential reports she was not supposed to access, and now they had unknowingly stepped into her investigation. Sitting again in the holding cell, she leaned her head back against the cold concrete wall, closing her eyes for a brief moment. She thought about her father, a retired firefighter, who used to say, "Never shout when you can whisper and still be heard." She had shaped her entire career around that principle. Yet now she found herself trapped in a small-town jail, where the so-called good old boys assumed she would be an easy target. They had no clue they had just handed her everything she needed. She had names, knew their behaviors, and had access to their body camera footage if it had not been inexplicably turned off. That fact alone was enough to sound alarms, but she had to buy time until Talbot found her. He always did. Missing the Monday check-in was enough to raise suspicion. She only needed to wait a bit longer and let them continue digging their own downfall. The courtroom was smaller than Tina expected. Bare walls, faded portraits, ceiling fans that squeaked every few rotations. No reporters, no audience, just a handful of bored clerks, a drowsy bailiff, and Judge Ronald Beckwith. He looked like he had been dragged from bed only minutes ago and had yet to forgive anyone for the disturbance. Tina was brought in through a side entrance, shackled at her wrists and ankles, wearing the same loose-fitting orange jumpsuit. The chains clinked with every step, the sounds echoing sharply. She took a seat beside Ben Ridley, the overworked public defender who still had not met her eyes that morning. Opposite them, Officers Collins and Sharp stood rigid and confident in their pressed uniforms. Sharp flashed her a smirk, while Collins straightened his collar as if readying himself for a wedding speech. Judge Beckwith cleared his throat. "Let's proceed," he said. The clerk rattled off the charges. Possession with intent to distribute, possession of suspicious electronic devices, and refusal to cooperate. Tina maintained a calm expression, keeping her feelings tightly controlled inside. Her jaw clenched tightly. None of it was genuine yet, it appeared neat and precise, crafted with just enough reality to seem plausible. Officer Collins took the stand first, explaining that they stopped the vehicle due to suspicious actions. The car abruptly changed lanes without any signal, and the driver seemed evasive when questioned, so she was asked to step outside. A significant amount of suspected drugs was found in the trunk, carefully wrapped and hidden. Beckwith inquired if there had been any resistance, and Collins shook his head, saying it was minimal. The woman tried to argue that she had no idea what the substances were. When asked if she offered a credible explanation for the second phone, Collins replied no, stating it was private. Ben Ridley jotted something on his legal pad, which looked more like a doodle than a note. "Thank you, Officer Collins," the judge said. Officer Sharp followed smoothly, but Tina Ellis noticed the practiced cadence in his voice. He kept his gaze forward, never once meeting her eyes. That was significant. Even deceivers often had boundaries they wouldn't cross in eye contact. Sharp testified that the substance tested positive for illegal drugs, and that the phone was encrypted beyond typical civilian standards. The driver had refused to identify her employer. Beckwith nodded. "It seems we have a classic case of a drug courier. Bail is denied. She will remain in custody until Your Honor." The interruption came from the back of the courtroom. Everyone turned as a man in a charcoal suit, his temples gray, entered holding a black leather folder. His voice was calm yet authoritative. "My name is Special Agent Roy Talbot from the DEA. I need to speak with you privately now," the judge said, squinting. "Pardon me." Talbot stepped forward and handed him a document explaining, "This is a sealed federal file you will want to review off the record." Collins shifted as Officer Sharp blinked in surprise. Ben Ridley finally faced Tina Ellis, his eyes widening. The judge scanned the first few pages carefully, then looked up slowly, announcing, "The court is in recess for 5 minutes. Everyone must leave except for Agent Talbot and Ms. Ellis." Tina rose as the bailiff removed her shackles. Without a word, she walked alongside Talbot toward the judge's chambers, the room falling utterly silent behind them. Officer Sharp murmured quietly, "What on earth is happening?" Collins did not respond. Whatever grasp they believed they held on the situation had vanished with the figure in the charcoal suit. Inside Judge Beckwith's chambers, the atmosphere was heavier, the blinds drawn tight, and the wood-paneled walls dimly lit. Beneath an old lamp near the desk, Tina stood beside Roy Talbot, who had already unzipped his folder and spread a stack of documents about half an inch thick across the table. Talbot wasted no time saying, "Your Honor, what you see here is a signed clearance from the Department of Justice, 2 sealed warrants issued by the Middle District of Alabama, and a comprehensive briefing on Operation Greycut." The judge flipped through the pages, frowning more deeply with each one. "Miss Ellis," Talbot went on, "is no courier. She is a federally embedded DEA agent who has been undercover for the past 11 months investigating internal corruption connected to narcotics theft." Within the local law enforcement, Judge Beckwith reclined in his seat, still gripping one of the documents. "These are grave allegations," the judge remarked. "They are not allegations," Roy Talbot corrected him. "They are verified." He slid a flash drive across the table containing body camera recordings from the previous night. We retrieved this from precinct archives. What you will witness, provided the data has not been erased yet, is Officer Collins passing a bag from his own pocket, and Officer Sharp referring to a burner phone before it was even found in Tina Ellis's car. That footage, combined with GPS data and intercepted communications, already suggests a calculated setup. The judge remained silent, flipping through the pages and breathing more calmly. Finally, Tina spoke up. "Your Honor, I have monitored these officers since March. They exhibit a pattern, selecting travelers least likely to challenge charges, mostly women traveling alone. Evidence disappears or is fabricated, and until last night, there was no direct proof. Now there is." Beckwith ran his hand down his face. "I have served on this bench for 22 years, he said quietly. "I do not appreciate being deceived." "You were not the only one," Talbot responded, tapping the folder. "They have been supplying you with cases they manufactured, and I understand your trust. But this is corruption spreading openly. What do you require from me? Dismiss the charges?" The reply came quickly. "No, hold Collins and Sharp in custody here while we process the arrest warrants. We will be transferring jurisdiction to the federal court within the next hour," the judge said with a slow nod, then stepped back. In the courtroom, the door creaked open, and Beckwith returned to the bench. Tusher and Talbot followed Collins, while Sharp stood nearby with folded arms, trying to appear unaffected. Ridley remained seated, and Kutu was now utterly silent. Judge Beckwith did not even glance their way. After reviewing the new evidence presented by federal authorities, all charges against Miss Ellis are hereby dismissed, effective immediately. Collins's head jerked in surprise. Sharp moved forward. "Wait, what?" "You two will stay inside this courthouse under supervision," the judge interrupted, voice flat. "Until further notice, you must remain here." "I do not believe you understand," Collins said, voice rising as if she had finally had enough. Beckwith's gavel struck firmly against the block. "Court is adjourned." The quiet that followed was heavy. Sharp did not look at either of the men as she walked by. Talbot trailed behind, speaking quietly. "We are extracting data from their precinct server now. We have already subpoenaed their text messages. If even half of the information matches what our informant revealed, they are finished." As they reached the hallway, Talbot slowed. "Glad you kept your composure," he said. Sharp did not respond right away. She peered down at the loose cuffs dangling from her wrists, then at the door they had just passed through. "They thought I was just another woman with the wrong car and the wrong story, and now they are only two men with the wrong job." Tina Ellis was no longer focused on the wrong future he mentioned. Her thoughts had already shifted to what awaited her next. When Tina and Roy Talbot stepped outside, the sun had risen high above the trees, casting distinct shadows across the courthouse steps. Two federal agents stood nearby next to an unmarked black SUV. One of them handed Roy a file and stated, "I pulled the precinct logs just like you requested." The agent confirmed that Officer Collins's keycard had accessed the evidence room 7 times last month, including twice on days when he was not scheduled to work. Tina took the file and examined the timestamps, comparing them carefully against the case notes she had compiled over several months. Officer Sharp's name appeared linked to a confiscated batch from a bust near Meridian. Although the drugs were slated for destruction, they were never officially recorded as destroyed. Tina muttered, "They built a system using their uniforms as passes to steal and resell, covering their tracks with minor arrests, planting evidence, and coercing the accused into plea deals. Roy agreed, saying, "It is not just them. They are part of something bigger. We have similar reports coming in from Choctaw and Lowndes counties. The pattern is the same, and the courthouse remains silent." Officer Sharp and Officer Collins were being questioned separately. One of the federal agents nearby had already slipped into an adjoining room, uploading Collins' body camera files to a forensic laptop. Tina was certain what the investigation would uncover. Back in the car, she reached for her encrypted burner phone, preparing for the next move. From a sealed evidence bag still locked and completely untouched, they attempted to fabricate it as if it were an undeniable proof. She admitted she had not fully grasped its true significance at first. Talbot glanced over and asked if she wanted to be the one to report it. She shook her head, saying not quite yet. She wished to analyze it herself first with precision and care. He realized this had become deeply personal for her. They then headed to a secure field office just outside Demopolis, where a small team had been collecting information from locals over the past 3 weeks. Behind a heavy steel door with 2 layers of security, Tina finally settled at a genuine desk. The walls were covered with charts, dates, names, and booking photos. At the center was a corkboard with thin red threads connecting officers to dealers and dealers to properties, seizures that had mysteriously disappeared. Her name was not on the board, exactly how she wanted it. Talbot observed as she examined digital files tagged with locations and correlated suspect movements with outdated GPS signals. She cross-checked phone records from Collins's personal device, obtained by a subpoena granted only an hour before, and discovered countless calls to a man known to her as Elijah. Burke's street alias was Ghost, a supplier with established contacts in Mobile and Pensacola. There it was, a connection between Collins and the trafficking operation, not simply theft or threats, but actual product transportation across state boundaries, which constituted a federal offense. "He set himself up," Talbot commented. She responded, "Yes, he trapped himself." At that moment, a junior analyst entered carrying 2 folders. Preliminary testimony from one of the women detained last month revealed a familiar pattern of tactics: threats and forced searches without any warrant. Tina Ellis took the folder and exhaled deeply. She explained they were not merely abusing authority, but using it as a shield, and they would have continued unchecked if she had not been stopped. Roy Talbot crossed his arms and said they challenged the wrong woman. She slightly nodded before glancing down at her notes. "I do not want them just to be prosecuted. I want every case they influenced reopened. Everyone they silenced deserves justice." He did not disagree. Outside, the sun was sinking low, casting a golden light across the parking lot. Tina lingered by the door, staring at the distant horizon. This situation was no longer about Collins and Sharp alone. It never had been, because when power is misused for too long, silence is no longer an option, and someone inevitably stands up to fight back. 3 weeks later, Tina Ellis waited outside the same courthouse where she had once been showcased in chains. This time, no handcuffs, no orange jumpsuit. She wore a simple navy suit and held a calm, unwavering gaze. The days of testimony were over. Collins and Sharp had been formally charged with numerous federal offenses: tampering with evidence, violating civil rights, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, and obstructing justice. The courtroom had been filled that day with reporters, family members, and lawyers burdened with too many case files and too little time to digest them all. Those 2 men now sat separated in different cells, separated by locked doors in 2 distinct locations, Their power was stripped away. The media branded them corrupt officers, yet to Tina Ellis, that label always seemed too simple, too neat. What they did carried real consequences. It destroyed lives. Some of those people were still imprisoned because they lacked the advantage of a federal badge concealed in their luggage. Outside the courthouse, a group of high school students gathered for their civics field trip to start. A young black girl, perhaps 15 or 16 years old, noticed Tina as she walked by. She whispered something to her friend, who then glanced over as well. Tina said nothing. There was no need to. She simply met the girl's eyes, held the glance, and gave a genuine nod, one from someone who had faced hardship and emerged clearer, not colder. Back in Jackson, Tina finally returned to her own apartment. The lights were still on timers, and somehow her plants were alive. The suitcase she had carried that night remained untouched in the hallway. She opened it carefully and found the blazer she had worn during the arrest still folded over the edge. Running her hand along the sleeve, she then tossed it into a bin labeled evidence, not meant for court, but for herself. The next morning, she called Roy Talbot. "I am taking 2 weeks," she said firmly. "You earned 6, but I will settle for 2. Then I am back." He did not argue. Tina did not take time off because she needed rest. She did it knowing the work would still be there, and she needed to face it with clear eyes. No emotions, only facts. But the truth remained. She had nearly been wiped away. 1 stop, 2 dishonest badges, a planted bag, and that moment could have marked the end. No trial, no headlines, just another woman trapped in the system, overlooked and doubted. That reality stayed with her. She spent a day visiting 3 women whose charges were dismissed. Since her story came to light, one of them, a mother of 4, wept for almost 10 minutes before she could say, "Thank you." Another had endured 9 months in a state facility for accusations now proven false. Tina handed her a sealed envelope containing contacts for legal aid and housing support. Someone to guide her into the next chapter. That was what justice meant. Not only courtrooms and verdicts, but restoring those broken by those wearing the wrong uniform. Later that evening, she sat on her back porch, a cup of tea in hand, her eyes wandering over the quiet street for no particular reason. Her neighborhood wasn't silent, just peaceful. A voice echoed in her mind. Her father's voice again. "People will judge you before you speak, but when they learn who you truly are, ensure that it humbles them." That was the lesson. Not revenge, not anger, just truth. Cold, clear, and essential. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone because the truth had already done that for her. Power only intimidates when you lack your own. And sometimes, the mightiest weapon is patience. If you are watching this, remember never to make assumptions and always stand your ground. When someone attempts to tell your story for you, take the pen and complete it on your own. Subscribe to hear more stories like this, because certain truths must be spoken out loud.